Hello and welcome back to A Shark's Perspective. If you wanted to start somewhere with changing the experience, then bringing new employees in as well as keeping them is a great place to start as well. Everyone wants to work for a great company, right? But so many companies fail at telling the stories of their employees and really knowing how to use that as a competitive differentiator of their own. This one's been a big part of my own personal experience dating back to early in my career, and I see it just as much not being used well today. Too often we see the logo just slapped on any random employee's story, and trust me, that isn't the story. Elizabeth Vassolo is the head of global employment brand at McDermott, Will and Emery, a global law firm, and the former head of employer brand marketing at the Kraft Heinz company. And on this episode, we'll discuss marketing, HR, recruiting, a product that can change its mind, storytelling, content pillars, Atticus Finch, Ketchup, Kool-Aid, Oscar Mayer, and a lot more. So let's tune in to an HR marketer with a former recruiting shark on this episode of A Shark's Perspective. Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining us today on A Shark's Perspective. If you would tell us a little bit about your background and your career to date.
Sure. I am the head of employment brand at a global law firm, McDermott, Will and Emery. Prior to that, I was at Kraft Heinz, and I was head of employment brand there. Before that, I was working at a network infrastructure company, and I was doing just general brand management. And then prior to that, I had my own business, and I was doing social media marketing and other kinds of digital marketing, like email marketing as well. And then prior, I worked with the Chicago Tribune, and I was part of a team that helped launch their user-generated, reverse-published initiative called Trib Local. So we were working in the communities, getting them involved with Trib Local and the Chicago Tribune, and we had an online presence, and we also printed a section in the Thursday paper that covered specific suburban news.
Well, what got you interested in employer branding for HR?
So to me, when I think of employment branding, in terms of marketing, it's really no different than marketing a product or a service. So really, you're marketing the experience of what it's like to be at a company. So I like this aspect of marketing because it's really human focused, and so that gives you a lot of storytelling opportunities and a lot of expansion with that
Oh, right.
storytelling. Yeah, so that's really what attracted me to this space.
So I've been really happy having had a background in recruiting as well to see marketing take more of a forefront with HR and recruiting, and especially with the ability to do storytelling. But why do you think it's needed today?
Well, I mean, we're in a really good job market.
Yeah.
Companies are competing for top talent, right? Everybody wants to get at this particular pool of candidates. You've got people leaving companies, leaving jobs after 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. So you're not seeing people spending 10 years at an organization. And we're all digital savvy people, and when people are looking for jobs, they're doing research, right? And if
hmm
you're not out there in a proactive way, they're going to have a hard time learning about you, and then you might potentially lose out on an excellent candidate for your organization.
How much of that do you think marketing can help fix, though?
Oh, I think so. There's a couple different things. Marketing can only reflect the reality of what's happening at a company.
Yes.
So so when I look at employment brand, no company is perfect, right? So when I look at employment brand, we try to pull out the positives that we think truly differentiate us, and then also what we can realistically promise, right? So
hmm
you need to make sure that your promise for your candidate is what they're going to experience at when they get a job and they start working. So that's something that is really, really important, is that you have to have it rooted in reality. And then what you're also doing when you have this marketing program or campaigns and whatever kind of communications you develop for the initiative, you're giving tools to the recruiters and to the hiring managers. So you're able to help control the narrative by giving them exactly what they need to communicate exactly what we need to communicate.
Perfect. So, well, I know you jumped from Panduit to Kraft and dove in more into the employer side of it with that focus. What was it like working with a brand as large as Kraft on helping develop their employment brand?
Yeah, so it's very interesting because Kraft had three specific populations that they were going after in terms of employees. They had their manufacturing side of the business, they had their corporate side of the business, and then we had the student side of the business, so interns and the university level hires. So what we needed to do is we needed to create something that talked to all of those audiences,
Sure.
but also gave us the ability to, when we were talking to the audience, to nuance the conversation. So when we were talking to the blue collar team and blue collar candidates, we had the same campaign, but we tweaked it a little bit. Same for the white collar and same for the university audience as well. So it was exciting with Kraft Heinz because you're on top of a bunch of really beloved brands. So in some ways it's easier when you have a high profile consumer based organization because you can pull into all of the things that people love and know about the products.
Yeah, people already know somewhat to some degree what they're getting into with a large company like that. But did you ever see that really as sort of a detriment to the recruiting practice as well? As much as we know and love Kraft and Planners and Oscar Mayer and Heinz and all those brands, does that also make it difficult when recruiting the kind of candidates you may want to recruit?
I think so. So no company is immune from negative press, right? So it's I can safely say Kraft has weathered a couple storms, and that's normal, right? So what we needed to make sure that regardless of where potential candidates were finding us, we were buffering some of the negative news with really positive news. Because for all of the negative things that were surrounding Kraft Heinz, there was so much good going on that that's the story we chose to tell. And then we did a couple different things where we got our employees really involved in sharing those stories. So we were able to amplify that messaging in an organic way, in an authentic way,
Hmm.
that really went to counteract some of maybe the negative perception that candidates may have had about Kraft Heinz.
So now you're working for a global law firm. Talk about
hmm
what that transition's been like and sort of wrapping your arms around a large law firm that is obviously recruiting. The world needs more lawyers. So,
well, it's interesting because it's fundamentally the discipline from how I approached my work at Kraft Heinz to how I'm approaching my work here. The discipline is exactly the same.
yeah.
So what we're doing is we're looking at who our ideal candidate is. We're trying to understand what they want, and we're trying to build that messaging that bridges that gap. And then with that messaging, we want to make sure that we have a consistent presence and we have a consistent really flow of information and storytelling that reflects that messaging. Now, within each space, CPG versus professional services, the way that you go to market is a little bit different, and that's just a tactical thing. So we at Kraft Heinz, we were hiring in such volume, so we had to approach things differently. Whereas at a law firm, the volume is significantly smaller, and you're dealing with, especially in the university space, you're dealing with an entirely different recruiting cycle. So there's certain things that from a tactical point of view you need to be mindful of, but the actual building the program, figuring out the messaging and using your employees to amplify it is essentially the same across all industries.
So I don't know this. I mean, obviously, every company really generally tends to have some focus on recruiting at the university level today, looking at that
hmm
long-term play. But with a law firm, are you actively recruiting people that are maybe mid-career, like you would think in a
Oh,
lot of
yes.
other roles?
Absolutely, absolutely. So in the professional service, specifically law firm industry, you've got your graduates, you've got your young associates, you've got your laterals, which are seasoned lawyers that may have been partners at other firms, and they're making a lateral move to a new firm. And then you have a whole team of professional business people that are there to support the work of the lawyers. So again, you're still talking about several different audiences, and then it's all about developing that broader message that really captures what your organization believes in and who you are as an organization, and then nuancing that message for the audience.
Talk a little bit, if you will, about the stories of the people and really how to craft a story of an employee that helps tell the story for your brand, and then what you should do, or really what you shouldn't do with that story.
So when we think about building a campaign, we really look at messaging pillars. So
Yeah.
as you do your research work and as you do your discovery work, as you start to develop campaign themes and you start testing them internally and externally, you start to find major themes that emerge. And then what you want to do is, in my experience and my recommendation is, you want to make sure that within each theme you have an appropriate storytelling engine, whether that is from the employees themselves, whether that is from third-party validation, like through PR, so news articles and such, and then whether that's through other things like events and different types of thought leadership. So within each of your pillars, you want to make sure that you have these storytelling elements that every time you talk about your employment brand, it connects back to a pillar, and it's there to amplify that message. So when you go to market, you always know Kraft Heinz stands for these three things when you work there. The law firm stands for these three things
Yes.
when you join the company. So it's really about honing in on what those pillars are, and those pillars are really rooted in your differentiation. And so that's what you have to keep thinking about. And you also have to be disciplined in that storytelling, because there's always a lot of great stories in an organization and a lot of great employees, but you want to make sure you're finding the right stories and the right nuggets, so
Wonderful.
it feels consistent.
Yeah, it's almost like a content marketing play.
Hmm.
It's not just the idea of putting something out there. It's got to be the right kind of content.
Right. That's exactly right.
When do you think brands go too far with the stories of the people? And what I mean by that is, a lot of people that I've talked to over the years are often scared of putting an employee out there. It used to be that they were worried that person would get recruited. But also, I think a lot of people are worried that employee might do something, that gets themselves in trouble, and then that represents the brand badly, or puts a bad light on the brand.
Well, I think that when you're identifying employees that you want to feature, you you probably have a pretty good understanding of who they are personally and their performance and their commitment to the organization. So you want to make sure that you're being mindful of that when you're selecting employees. Now, if they get recruited based on representing your brand, well, then you've probably done a really good job, because that just shows that your storytelling is resonating, and that person is reflecting your organization in such a positive way that another company wants them. So, and you're never gonna prevent other people from recruiting your top talent. All you can hope to do as a company is to make sure that you have a good enough environment and a good enough culture that they want to stay. And that's also the other side of employment brand. It's not just the external focus; it's the internal component too. So, when you think about communications, everything internal is external and everything external is internal. So, if you're talking about your culture externally and the experience of working there, you need to make sure it matches internally. And if the story's that good, that person might not want to leave your organization. But you shouldn't be concerned about that, because that will create some paralysis, and then you'll never do anything. Um, so that's one way to approach it. Um, did I answer your question? I think there was a follow-up.
Yeah, I see. I think the other is the fear of them possibly doing something wrong, getting in trouble, and then it becomes a PR issue.
Again, I think it really goes to vetting who should be the right representative of your company. But then on the flip side of that, things happen. You can't control everything. So you always need to make sure you have your communications team and your PR team aligned with the work that you're doing to prevent or mitigate any issues like that. I honestly, in my career, have not come across that where we featured somebody or storytelling and then we find out later they're involved in something nefarious. So I haven't really had that experience. But, if I did, I always make sure that our comms team and our PR team, they're all they're all ready to go and they're aware of what we're doing in the employment brand space to make sure that we have all of our bases covered.
Talk a little bit about social proofing and what you've seen. I think Glassdoor's the brand, obviously everybody knows, but
Yeah.
talk about the value of that and where people are looking for social proofing in making their employment decisions.
So I would say Glassdoor and LinkedIn are the two
Sure.
are the two most popular places, and they're different functions, right? So a
Well,
lot
and
of
there's a
times,
different level of complaints too. People love to complain on Glassdoor because it doesn't necessarily
Mhm.
follow them. LinkedIn, you don't necessarily get people sounding like they're on Twitter talking about it being the worst company in the world if they left there for a bad reason.
Right. So you're never, just like any product, you're never going to always please everybody,
Sure.
right? So when you're talking about Glassdoor, my approach is to make sure I really love the response element of Glassdoor. So if somebody leaves a negative review, a couple of things need to happen. I do think it's always a wise idea for an organization to respond to. Now, you might not have the bandwidth to respond to every review, but to actually read the reviews and respond when appropriate, good and bad, and then also to track the themes that you're seeing in the reviews. And it's
Hmm.
those themes that you can take internally to your culture team, your comms team, um, and you can address those themes and you can say, hey, look, we've got a real problem with this and we need to address it internally and we need to craft messaging around it to start to change that perception. So Glassdoor is a strong tool for employers as well because it gives you insight that you probably wouldn't get otherwise. You would probably not even get it from your engagement interviews that you're doing or your engagement surveys that you're doing. So it is a strong tool. Now, in terms of the people that are using it, the potential candidates, they're certainly coming to it to research your company. And it's interesting because if you have a specific tech stack, you can track if your candidate has gone to your LinkedIn page, then your Glassdoor page, then your Facebook page. So you can start to see the journey of the research collecting and the research they're doing about your organization and where they're starting and where they're ending up. Glassdoor traditionally tends to be one of the last platforms they visit when they typically are completing the interview process or um, getting ready to go in and meet with the company and then afterwards if they get the job or don't get the job. So Glassdoor tends to be, in my experience, at the end of the process, whereas LinkedIn and your website and news and PR tend to be at the front end of it.
We'll talk about referrals then and what that means to you on the employment side. I mean, I think most people love to say that with any kind of brand, especially in recruiting, referrals are their best sources of candidates.
Yeah, I think referrals are a great source of candidate, but not every referral is going to be a great candidate.
Sure.
So I think it's just being mindful and being forthright with your culture and what you stand for in a way that is easy for a candidate to understand and easy for a candidate to see themselves in that space. But I do think in terms of pipeline, talent pipeline, referrals are crucially important with that pipeline. But again, a referral only gets somebody to the door.
Yeah.
To make them come in the door for both parties, you have to make sure that they align with the organizational goals, and then also that you're able to communicate who you are as an organization. So again, what they perceive before they get hired and the experience they have when they're here are the same.
Well, whether it's a massive CPG firm or a law firm or anywhere else, how do you sort of design a system that fosters more referrals and more social connections to help build in those kind of candidates?
So I am a huge fan of LinkedIn's Elevate
Yeah.
platform. So to me, when you can get your employees involved in social amplification, that's number one.
Amen.
Because when you're sharing, when employees are sharing content that is essentially curated and has the right narrative threaded through it, they're sharing that with their audience, and it's going to get in front of more people than if you just posted it on your company page. So I love LinkedIn Elevate. It is a challenge to get it up and running, but once it does, it starts to snowball, and you just start to exponentially see growth. And then you can also track if somebody engaged with a piece of content and if you ended up hiring them. So you can start to see like a candidate journey into hiring, and based on what content is resonating. So I think that's a really great tool. But it's really about your employees. If you have an engaged workforce, they want to talk about why they work at a company, because everybody wants to work for a great company. Nobody wants to work for a crappy company. You have pride in where you work. So the tools that you can give your employees and the guardrails to do so, that's gonna be really important for your talent pipeline. The other thing is, I'm a huge fan of paid media as well. So I'm a huge fan of creating content to a specific audience and putting a budget behind it and serving it up to that audience. So to me, I can't stress enough that whatever you do with your marketing goals, you have to have a paid media element to it, especially in the social space.
Agree. Well, I cannot agree more with you talking about employee engagement or paid media, but especially employee engagement, which is such a problem, such a huge problem today with all employers. But it can provide such a lift for all kinds of content. Whether you've got a podcast that your company does, or commercials, or a referral program, or anything, it is the most coveted audience that brands so often ignore, and I don't understand why.
You said something really interesting that I want to comment on.
Sure.
When you're dealing with a company like a giant CPG, and even a big law firm, everybody that walks through your door, candidates are your customers. So everybody that experiences your brand, from buying the product to experiencing the services to interviewing, is engaging and potentially a customer. Or if they might already, especially in the Kraft Heinz case, they already probably are a customer because everybody loves ketchup, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that is actually an audience, a growth audience. If you take care of that candidate experience, it can really dramatically improve your bottom line, or it can dramatically, negatively affect your bottom line. So that's something to really be mindful of. When you're looking at the candidate experience, you must treat them as if they're your customers or future customers as well. There can't be a different mindset with dealing with candidates. So
Yeah.
I wanted to just mention that.
What have you done from a marketing standpoint that's helped drive employee engagement, other than what we just talked about, which was how
hmm
important it is? But what have you done, or what have you seen that's really helped
Yeah.
drive employee engagement?
So a couple different things. If you want employee engagement, you must have your leadership engaged. And it's
Yes.
not just your C-suite, it is your hiring managers, it's your people managers. They are the front line of that engagement. And I don't know what the statistic is that says most people don't leave a company because of the actual job, they leave because of the manager.
Yeah.
And if you're seeing, if and you can track what teams are losing people, you can track what the thoughts are on different hiring managers, and that's the first place you need to go. Is you need to really recognize your hiring team and your management team, and their skills, and growing those skills. The other thing with engagement is that if you're going to ask people to do a survey, you must share the results with them. That transparency is crucial. And on top of that, you need to connect the dots between why you're asking this question and what the outcome of that is, because nobody likes to do a survey and not see any outcome from it. And you hear it in lots of different organizations. They're like, I did a survey. I don't know what they do with the information. I haven't seen anything change. And so it's about having your people managers engaged and having the skills that make employees that help employees be successful, whether it's the emotional intelligence, the soft skills, the real tactical business skills. You need to make sure that you have well-rounded people managers. But then with the actual survey, you have to be transparent, and you have to say, hey, look, we're not perfect, because no company is perfect, and this is how we're going to get better. And that, to me, goes a long way with getting your employees engaged. When they are part of the solution, I believe you see higher engagement.
Agreed. And employment marketing, that type of marketing, it is a microcosm of the entire brand. And I'm so glad that now people are looking at the kinds of content. They're looking at candidates as potential customers. It's everything. It's everything, that telling stories, using paid media. I mean, it's just fascinating to me how this has evolved as a business practice itself, other than just putting a job up on monster.com and waiting for people to come in through Career Builder or anything else. It's just fascinating to me.
Well, the way I look at it is, I have a personal motto. How you do one thing is how you do everything. So to me, a brand, a company, how you treat your customers, how you treat your candidates, how you treat the products you create. I mean, that how you do that one time is how you do it across the board, and that's what builds the brand. And so that's the philosophy. So I always think of that when building brands, especially as you mentioned, employment brand fits under the umbrella of the main brand. Well, the main brand, what do they do that's so great? And that's what we have to do as well. Especially when you look at Kraft Heinz. The marketing for consumer products at Kraft Heinz is some of the best in the world. They have some of the smartest, sharpest marketing. Well, our employment brand marketing needs to be that way too, right? That's how we have to operate. Your internal communications need to be that way too, because that's, as an organization, what we do. And that's something always to keep in mind when you're building out these programs.
So, one of the things we were talking about earlier, when you look at differentiating the messaging you have, or I say maybe differentiating, aligning the messaging that you have, you can put out a lot of great stories about hiring and then have a lot of bad stuff come out about a brand. Kraft's, no different with a company that has such a large public profile with their numbers, and it could come out with a law firm or anybody else. But how do you sort of align that messaging to make certain that it's the same? Because, people are going to think what they think about Kraft. They're not going to take the time to differentiate whether you're a bad employer or a bad company as a whole. And people, for example, think of Amazon as a great company all the way around. They've had some problems. They've had some PR problems revolving around their employment, but they've done such a good job of aligning that messaging that it doesn't come out that often, considering how large of an employer they are.
Yeah, it's a narrative control issue. I mean, that's what it comes down to. It comes down to, for every negative piece of information that comes out, you need to make sure that you have counter positive information, and then that's what you're pushing out there. And sometimes, and I don't want to say this about Kraft Heinz, but if you do have a company that is going through something particularly bad or a challenge, or they're in some type of trouble, you can address that. And you can talk about how you're improving. I mean, that's a human to human thing. We know we're not perfect, but when especially when you come to like the gender and diversity and inclusion questions, there's very few companies that really have gender equality in leadership and in those spaces. But it's the commitment to it that really makes people pay attention. No company is perfect in that space. But if you come out and you share what your commitment is and the things that you're doing to get there, that's compelling. And that can potentially change perception from negative to positive.
Yeah, agree. So, how do you sort of wrap the narrative then? And this is kind of goes with something you just talked about with whether it's any kind of diversity. Have you seen over the years the more diversified your employment brand is, the better or harder that it is to recruit people? Because although you do open up more doors for other people, it can also be sometimes considered a little bit of a social stance that others don't agree with or maybe don't understand. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and that's something as an organization you have to be okay with.
Yeah.
If somebody is upset about joining a company because they see a particular representation of a group of people that they are uncomfortable with or have a negative perception of, you can't control that. All you can say is, look, we're a company, we believe diversity is important, so instead of telling you that, we're going to show you that. And
Yeah.
that's the other thing when you talk about marketing, and especially in the employment brand space. Don't tell me that you're going to have 50% of your women on your board, or you really are mindful of the journey of somebody who identifies as LGBTQ. Show me that.
Exactly.
Show me that. And that to me is we're human beings. We have been marketed to our whole lives. We are conditioned for marketing, and so we will naturally respond to it, good, bad, and ugly. And so that's what we want. Be honest with us. And again, if you're not there from a diversity and inclusion perspective, tell me and show me what you're doing to get there. And then also, that is an appealing thing for candidates as well, to join an organization that is actively growing and building something that the candidate believes in. And so that's also a place that you can start as well. Is not about who we are right now, but about the potential of who we can be as an organization, and that person having significant contribution to that.
Agreed. That was a great point. So, how are you seeing that employment is now also being used in other forms of messaging that the brand does to convey?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's you're seeing a lot more of employment stories, if you will, on people's social media, not necessarily in a separate employment group on Facebook, but I mean, you're starting to see the stories of people a lot more prevalent, and it has been for a few years, but what your
hmm
employees are doing either in the community or how you hire them or what their backstory is and where that's being delivered, as well as here's an offer or a coupon for Kraft macaroni and cheese. I'm making
hmm
that up, but we're starting to see a lot more of that.
Yeah, and I think companies can no longer be good at one thing be good at something to the detriment of something else,
Yeah.
right? So for me, the way I look at how employment brand works inside of a company is that I feel like I am the liaison between the university relations group. I'm a liaison between the diversity and inclusion, between if there's a culture group, between internal comms, between PR. So for me, employment brand isn't a separate thing. It's tying together everything that's happening in an organization and communicating that, and being the through line through all of that messaging. So, for example, if you do internal communication, I want the employment brand messaging to be threaded through what's happening in internal comms. I don't want there to be an internal comms team and an employment brand team. I want employment brand to be the underpinning and the sensibility and lens that we look at all of our other initiatives through. Because without it, then you don't have that message amplification, and it doesn't work. So, again, if you go back to the idea of creating your pillars, when you talk to your audience, your internal audience, your current employees, you roll in those pillars as well. When you're talking through your diversity, you're supporting your diversity and inclusion initiatives, you're flowing through those pillars as well. So the messaging feels organic, and it becomes part of the vocabulary, and that is really important too. So I feel like within a company I have so many stakeholders, and it's my job to unite everybody and give
Yes.
them the language to do so.
What do you think is the most important? I'm going to kind of borrow a features and benefits. The bad thing that we do too much in marketing is talk about that. But what is the most important part of the marketing puzzle that goes towards employee branding? And the reason I kind of use that pun is it benefits? Is it the work-life balance? Is it other conditions? Is it nap pods and ping pong tables? What do you see as your most important asset that you can have to tell a marketing story as part of an employer's brand?
So couple different things. It doesn't come down to a particular benefit that you're
Sure,
offering.
fair enough.
What it comes down to is, and this goes back to my comment about us being consumers born and bred. Whatever story you're telling, make it interesting and compelling and attention getting. That's the other thing that I see companies struggle with, is that they're talking about their employment brand, but it's so boring. I mean, in terms of not the content, maybe it is even the content, and then it's also not rooted in a bigger messaging platform, so you're not even sure how to respond to it. So for me, it's really about, you build your campaign, you take data, and then you do logic and magic with it, right? So you, you,
Hmm.
you start from a really core foundational research component, and then you add the marketing magic on it. And you can't forget the marketing magic, because that's how we respond as humans to messaging. I mean, you got to get my attention. So to me, and a lot of times, as this particular marketing function is evolving, a lot of times it was being supported by HR, and HR was like, "Well, we're not marketing people. How do we share this?" Well, now you're starting to see marketing really get involved in that messaging and crafting, and that's where you're going to see different companies, employment brands, start bubbling to the top as being examples of how to do it right. The other thing I want to comment as well is that when you're thinking of employment brand and you're talking about external versus internal, keep this in mind when you're thinking internal. You have to re-recruit your employees every day. So
Yes,
that's your current
thank you.
employees. So, it's not enough to just be focused on candidates. You have to make sure that your employment brand messaging is hitting internally in exactly the same compelling, exciting way that it's hitting externally. Because you need to make me come to work every day, and that's the job of employment brand.
Whether it's necessarily a good thing or not for brands to deal with, they've got to deal with it. We're
Hmm.
in such an economy. I wish it was that way when the economy was tough. I think people forget this. But even if you're not just recruiting somebody to a job to start, just getting them engaged on and how they
Hmm.
help you on social or the productivity they do, could not agree more. And this is, it's another reason why, we talked, because we were going to, months and months ago, because we were both going to speak at a conference and hit it off. And that's a home run message
Yeah.
right there. So Elizabeth, you're on a shark's perspective. What is your favorite kind of shark and why?
Oh gosh, I would have to say great white, 100%.
Thank you.
100%. Yeah.
Good,
They're
good
the
answer.
they're the sexiest, the apex. They breach. They have great mouths. I mean, what's not to love?
Hello. I mean, I hear the same thing about me all the time, other than breaching out of the
Ah.
water. But so Elizabeth, it's that time of my show. Are you ready for the 5 most interesting and important questions that you're going to be asked today?
Sure.
All right, here we go. Number 1: Kraft traditional macaroni and cheese or shells and cheese?
Oh gosh, shells and cheese. I think shells are a better delivery option.
Okay, fair enough. And hey, you're on a show talking about the ocean and sharks, so
Yeah.
shells on the beach. But all right,
Yep.
number 2, you're in the Chicagoland area where there are not a lot of sharks, but Willis Tower or the John Hancock Building?
Oh, John Hancock 100%
A
has the
hundred
best
percent.
bar
Best
at the
view
tip of the
too.
cock. Yeah.
All right, you work for a law firm now, so law firm movies or lawyer movies. To Kill a Mockingbird or My Cousin Vinny?
Oh, that's hard. I have a theater background, and I performed in To Kill a Mockingbird, so I
Nice.
enjoy that. But love Marissa Tomei, so that's a toss-up for me. Sorry.
You got to pick one or the other. It's Atticus Finch or
Ah,
Marissa Tomei.
okay. I'm gonna say My Cousin Vinny.
Okay, fair enough. Number 4, Kool-Aid or Jello?
Oh, Kool-Aid, cherry, always cherry.
Nice. Number 5, and the most important question you're going to be asked today is biscuits or cornbread?
Oh, biscuits.
Why so?
I would say biscuits handle toppings better than cornbread does.
Good answer. All right, Elizabeth, where do people find out more about you, follow your thought leadership, follow you on LinkedIn or any other social channel, see where you're
Yep,
speaking and
LinkedIn.
more?
Yeah, LinkedIn, and please reach out because I'm a very active LinkedIn user, and I love to connect with people in this space. And I always love to be helpful. I strive to be a super connector.
All right, perfect. Elizabeth, thank you again for being with us today on A Shark's Perspective.
Thank you.
So there was my conversation with Elizabeth Vassolo, the head of global employment brand at McDermott, Will & Emery, a global law firm, and the former head of employer brand marketing at the Kraft Heinz company. Let's take a look at 3 key takeaways from my conversation with her. First, do not forget, whether you're a company big or small, to focus on the employee experience, whether that's bringing them in the door or keeping them. For recruiters, your employer branding should be human-focused, and there are so many storytelling opportunities and great ones to tell for any brand. Look, if you're not the gazillion-dollar sexy tech brand, a great equalizer in competing against these top brands, and I speak from a lot of experience in this, the great equalizer is the actual people and their stories and how you tell those stories. And this is also one of the most opportune times to differentiate your brand's message of who you are and what makes you different by how you tell those stories. Your people are your stories. They may come from another employer or someday go to that gazillion-dollar tech brand, but how you help tell their stories and how they fit in with you as a brand, well, it can be a very powerful message of your own to tell. And don't just devote all of this attention when recruiting. One of my favorite quotes ever was when she said, "You have to recruit your employees every day." And that is so very, very true. Whether you want to hire them or keep them, providing an amazing experience and telling their stories is crucial. Second, so do you need marketing as part of your HR department? Absolutely. You need it in every department, not just so that marketing can have an influence, but just as much so that the department can help the marketer understand and better reflect that as well to the rest of the world. It's freaking competitive out there, so take advantage of a marketing strategy. It cannot fix everything, but it should be able to help amplify and package, if you will, the reality of the company and the positive stories that are rooted in reality. And it's not just every story. It's about finding the right ones that point back to a central message that helps tell that brand's bigger story. And the diversity and inclusion is such a hot topic right now. So is cause marketing. Just don't fail on this, please. I get highly discouraged by so many brands putting diversity, for example, as a marketing ploy. It's got to be real top to bottom. It should be authentic with who you are and who your people are. So don't overpackage and put too much marketing spend, especially on what it is if it's not real. We can and we should drive change. Just understand what kind of vehicle you're driving. You don't want your employees or customers buying something that really isn't what it is. Third, your best influencers are your employees, and employee engagement is still one of the most important tools you'll ever have in your toolkit, yet it remains so incredibly underutilized and misunderstood for so many businesses. As a marketer, figure out what makes your employees tick and what stories they want to tell. It's not necessarily the stories you think that they want to tell. Take the foot off the gas of the brand babble, and remember that employee engagement is not some campaign idea. From top to bottom, your leadership has to be involved at every level. We waste so much time packaging it like it's a campaign, but no company is perfect. Be imperfect. Just be authentic. Look, I failed as a manager with my people on many occasions too. So I've learned these lessons the hard way, but I continue to see even more managers and companies fall flat on their faces with this so much worse today. Got a question? Send me an email to kenneth@asharksperspective.com. Thank you again for the privilege of your time. Now go and find some work that you love that isn't a job, and join us on the next episode of A Shark's Perspective.